Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Seven. I am Lucy Baldwin, and this podcast is all about doing magic to get what we want, really, and also living with the planets. So, thinking about the planetary archetypes. But today, I'm not going to be talking about the planets so much because I'm going to be talking about a topic that I think is very interesting, one that I kind of tend to brush over a lot and maybe even arguably misuse these terms. So I'm going to talk about evocation versus invocation. And I want to just start by saying that the whole concept here is that in invocation, we're actually calling a spirit, entity, deity, archetype, energy into ourselves. And in evocation, we are calling it outside of ourselves. So we're calling it into our presence, but it's out there, it's separate from us. And this is something that I just want to touch on because I think that it is good fruit for understanding what we're doing in magic and also framing some of the magic that I've been talking about. Because the way that I've been framing magic is that we're calling forth these things within ourselves that already exist within ourselves. And that's, of course, totally true. And that's exactly what we're doing. And also, so I guess I'm just going to confess and say that I kind of use invocation for both of these. When I mean evocation and invocation, I just always say invocation. We're invoking the archetype, we're invoking the planet that we're working with. But it's actually different. And I think it's important because it helps us think about what we're doing when we're doing magic and ritual. And also, it helps us think for ourselves, or you think for yourself, about how you want to relate to these energies, archetypes, gods, whatever you want to call them, because you can think of them as entering your space and being out here, and you can engage with them here. And in some sense, that makes more sense. And sometimes that's actually how I'm engaging. And sometimes it's something that we're calling up in ourselves. But there's an interesting side of this, which is that these gods literally exist within us and we can become them. And so I think there's actually a lot of power and potential with especially certain archetypes when we imagine that we are becoming, not just that we're leaning into these archetypes, but no, I'm fucking Mars. I'm the fucking god of war right now. That's empowering. So just thinking about ways that we can play with this and actually imagine that we have become this archetype and also, or this god. I mean, fuck it. But also within that, there's also this concept of that each of us has a higher self. Each of us has our own sort of personal God, our own personal um, version of a God that is our sort of higher knowing, all powerful self that we can access. And also, there are certain ways that we can think about how we're doing our ritual to actually, how do we want to visualize it? Do we want to imagine that we're becoming the God, or do we want to, and then we can, our thoughts are the thoughts of the God. The wisdom is given to us just with what we're thinking in our own mind, or do we want to imagine it's out here and then we can interface with it and look at it? And so how do we want to frame our ritual depending on what feels most inspired and exciting for us? And I think I said I do a mix of these and I call it always invocation, but sometimes it can be really powerful to relate to it as other, because when you're relating to it as other, you can ask it for things. You can have that sort of reciprocal relationship that I spoke about in the offerings episode where I talked about offerings. All of that feels more natural when you're thinking of it as other. With other, you can petition other. And so I find that really helpful. And I think that that's a way that rituals are often framed, is we're asking for something. And so that feels natural to do it as we're doing it as the other. But then a more intuitive way of working with these energies that I think is really powerful powerful is to just embody them in certain circumstances. And I would, of course, recommend doing a version of both of these. So I want to give a little bit of historical context because in older magics, in older grimoires, Solomonic magic, Goetia, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Goetia, Goetia, Goetic. I don't know. I've seen it even spelled different ways. And medieval sort of ceremonial magic, they did a lot of evocation. So they were calling spirits. So they would like have a circle on the ground and they would call the spirit there. Or if you think of a Ouija board, is literally evoking a spirit, right? A ghost, theoretically. This is something that they did a lot where it's sort of staying outside. The idea of invoking it into yourself, like invoking it into your own mind, your own body as the vessel, came about more in the Renaissance period with Hermeticism and Neoplatonism and the Golden Dawn. And of course, from the Golden Dawn came Thelema. And they were very much into like being possessed by it, to channeling. Like this is what you're doing when you're channeling, right? You're bringing it through you. You are the vessel. This is like shamanic trance or any kind of channeling that you're doing that is happening. That's invocation, right? I think sometimes I'm not an expert on channeling. I think sometimes people see it still as it's coming through them. Maybe that's how I sort of imagine a channel being, but we're speaking as though it's in our body. And sometimes, especially if they're like moving in certain ways, to me that they've invoked it, like it's residing in them somehow. So I don't know, I'm not an expert on channeling. Maybe probably some channels see it as like channeling, it's passing through them, and some of them feel they are actually like it's entering their body. I generally, like, in terms of channeling, I don't like the idea of having some foreign entity enter my body. For some reason, to me, that feels very different than invoking a planetary deity slash archetype, because I see that as a piece of myself. I see myself as already having Mars exists within me. I think that if I'm being true to my sort of philosophical stance on reality, I could see an argument where I might have to accept that kind of all of real, like I have access with my own psyche to to the full range of existence, because I am, as we all are, tapped into the great mystery, the one collective mind. But that doesn't feel quite right to me. It feels different for me. I think that there are certain archetypes that it feels like my particular lens is different. We're the same, but I don't want like somebody else to enter my body and my mind and take it over. With the planets, it feels like I'm still me, but their archetype is now I am also Mars as me. So I don't know. That's just kind of, there's a weird nuance there. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well, but that's how it feels for me. So like I said, planetary magic works both ways, because if you listen to my episode about offerings, which I highly recommend checking out, I talk about how one way of doing offerings is to actually just embody the archetype. That is what invocation is. But another way is to literally give gifts to the planet. And you can even call the planet into your presence while you do that. So you can evoke the planet and then give it an offering, or you can invoke the planet as the offering. And of course, you could do both. You could invoke it and then eat the steak that you cooked for Jupiter. I don't know. Sometimes that feels like cheating to me, but I'm kind of having fun with this. Maybe we could just play with it and just cook Jupiter a steak, evoke Jupiter, give it to Jupiter, and then invoke Jupiter and then eat the steak as Jupiter. I mean, that could be fun. That could be a fun way to give your offerings. Any excuse to eat steak over here. I'm sorry, vegetarians and vegans. I am a carnivorous person. So yeah. And the other thing is thinking about the Venusian side of this, just embodying Venus. And Venus is, she's beauty and she's pleasure and she's just, that sounds so nice. I want to do that right now. Evocation is projection. We're projecting it outwards, whereas invocation is integrating it into ourselves. And so I really think there's value in both of these. And I think it's actually helpful to do both of these because if you can invoke, let's say you're in an argument and you have the wherewithal to have a invoke Mars, that's going to be really helpful. But then maybe you know you need to have a confrontation and you want to evoke Mars, ask for help, give an offering, and then in the moment you can invoke Mars and have it can, like, help you carry through in the moment, and so I actually see this as a really helpful way to sort of use ritual in a more from the evocation stance of we're calling it into our field, we're giving offerings, and we're asking for things. There's sort of this reciprocal, but also reverential relationship happening, and then in the moment when we're actually out in the world, the invocation is something that's happening more on the fly. And it's something that you can kind of act from and then bring in these archetypes to help you actually make the change. And I have a suspicion that if you're doing both of these, it's going to work better. They're both going to work better. If you make an offering and petition and ask for help and do a ritual, proper ritual, and then you bring that deity in the moment when it's actually relevant, that ritual is going to be more powerful. And for having done the ritual in the moment, invocation is going to be more powerful. So you're kind of approaching it from both angles. You're both working with it as an ally, and you're also embodying it as a version of yourself that you have access to. A lot of times, and this is why I love planetary magic so much. And I like to kind of, I love astrology, but I also, this is where it really differs from astrology because we're doing so much more than just having planets move and be in placements. We are literally bringing their power into us. We're becoming them, and we're also working with them in relationship with them. So it's not something that's just happening to you. It's actually something that you are holding, that you are embracing, that you are taking on. So yes, I think that I could see a lot of questions arising around like the safety of this. I did kind of address it earlier. I think that I wouldn't recommend invoking just random spirits or gods or deities that you haven't worked with before or just willy-nilly or just sort of inviting anything into your field. But I feel the planets are they're well established, they're well understood, they're, let's say, relatively safe, assuming you're working with the planets. And if you're worried about it, start with evocation, start with calling something in and work your way up to the embodiment piece. I do think that a lot of people in today's world are really into like becoming divine. And I think that, a piece that we can kind of take and carry forward with traditional magic that I think it behooves us to kind of consider is that traditionally in magic, there was a lot of like discipline. These were relationships that you had to show up for them. You couldn't just like make an offering once and then expect major results. And I kind of think that is how it is now, but you can get so much out. It's just like everything. You get out what you put in. And so I think that it is actually helpful to pull in some of the more traditional sides of it where there's this sense of like preparation and there's this sense of structure and we're sort of showing up and putting in a little bit of effort and also having that respect. I think that there's a big piece here to having respect for these archetypes and treating them as though they are gods and having humility. Like, I like the idea of becoming, embodying, and being the God. And I like the idea of embracing our divinity. And I feel like with anything else, it can also be a trap if you take it too far. And of course, this is where I'll come in with my usual thing about Saturn and how amazing Saturn is. And Saturn will help you realize that whatever. I just love Saturn. But truly, Saturn forces us to acknowledge our humanity. And part of our humanity is having limitations. And so I do think that there is a piece of us, like I said earlier, that is divine. We have access to our own personal sort of divinity that exists that we can I think, touch and that is guiding us, and it's sort of our own personalized, yeah, divinity, that's the best word that I have for it, and but recognizing that we are different from that, and so we are not all powerful, and we do have limitations, but seeing, life's happenings, like choosing to see life's happenings as a gift from your divine self, a gift from this piece, this higher sort of part of you. We talk about self with the capital S, and thinking of it as something that you can tap into your own wisdom, your own version of this, your own, perfectly balanced, perfectly wise, all knowing part of you that does have access, that has that tether to this greater collective consciousness that we all do have access to. And sometimes it feels so far away, but it's right there, and we can build that bridge to that higher self. And I actually think that working with the planets can help us forge that bridge, because it's like seven different inroads to accessing that part of yourself, because of course all of these seven deities exist within your higher self also. And the last thing I want to say is that I think that I hope that this is helpful in showing you kind of more of what's available to you within the world of working with the planets and living with the planets and doing ritual magic. And I encourage you to experiment and see what works for you and do what feels right for you, because as I say again and again, there is no wrong way to do this. You are relating to yourself. And I also just, I don't know, kind of because I brought it up in this episode, want to encourage you to connect with your higher self and to feel into that part of you that does like know and does have the wisdom and knows what is best for you. So, thank you so much for watching another episode of The Seven. I have a free community that involves monthly rituals, and sometimes in those rituals, we do evocation mostly. And sometimes we do invocation. And honestly, I kind of haven't been distinguishing between them, but I think I'm going to start to now that I recorded this. And I want to encourage you to join my online free community. We also do community connection calls every month, which are really wonderful, beautiful calls. One of my favorite things every month. So check it out. You can join at the link in my bio, and I will see you there. Have a great day.